Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Lily Chang. I'm the founding director of the Chinese Cultural Center at San Diego State University. Currently, I also serve as the chair of the board of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. Today, we welcome you to a wonderful program, and the program is about our fabulous anime Wong. Our speaker will be Katie Gee. Our moderator is Dr. Bob Stein, who is a member of the board of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. He also serves as the chair of the Palomar Rehabilitation Hospital and a key member of the American Heart Association at San Diego State Chapter. Welcome you all to our great program. Dr. Bob.
Thank you very much, Lily. And Lily taped this because she can't be with us, and she'll be thrilled to hear that we started precisely at 10, exactly the way she likes it. And I'm thrilled to be here today. We have a very interesting show, I'm sure, and with Katie Gee Salisbury. The first thing I want to do is talk about upcoming events. And if we could have the next slide, next month, we have our good friend, Dr. Russell Lowe, who's researched the life of Hop Lee via an array of primary sources, including a fortune-telling scroll, and wrote a book called A Willow Tree Becomes a Forest. And it's going to be a lot of fun to hear that in July 19th. And then in August, we have presenter Hui Han Lee, who's going to talk about My China Roots. And at this point, I want to mention upcoming events at the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, July 6th. We are fortunate to have none other than Michael Yee, who has done extensive research in the San Diego Chinatown and is going to lead an Asian Pacific Historic District walking tour. And this is a great chance to have the best walking tour of Chinatown that you'll ever have on July 6th. And I also want to thank at this point our sponsors, the PL Charitable Trust and the Shu family. And at this point, I want to turn things over to Carolyn Chin, who's going to talk about upcoming events at the Chinese Cultural Center at San Diego State University. Carolyn?
Thank you, Dr. Bob. My name is Caroline Chen. I serve as an ambassador for the Chinese Culture Center at San Diego State University. I'm delighted to join you this morning for the fabulous program about Anime Wong. The Chinese Culture Center is currently hosting our summer program on campus. In addition, we have an ongoing exhibit of the fantastic paintings of Professor Yu Chunming. So please come and visit us and enjoy today's program. Now, some guidance for engagement of today's program. After the presentation, if you have a comment or a question, you may raise your Zoom hand or write in the chat box. Your host will call on you when it's your turn. Now, before the program starts, we will take a group photo. So please turn on your camera just before the beginning of the lecture. After we take the group photo, when the lecture begins, please turn both of your camera and your microphone off. Now we will take the group picture. Please have your Zoom camera on.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we've got the first screen. There we go. There are 3 in total. 1, 2, 3. And now on the third screen. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now back to you, Dr. Bob.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I'm glad that's over. All that smiling just kills me. If we could have the next slide, please. We are thrilled to have with us today. Katie Gee Salisbury, a fifth-generation Chinese American, originally from Southern California, now living in the New York area, who has given a TED Talk on Chinese restaurant workers called As American as Chop Suey. She's a writer and photographer and has written the book, Not Your China Doll, about the biography of Anime Wong, and her work has appeared in the New York Times and Vanity Fair. And we are thrilled to have as a discussant a world-renowned vintage film poster and lobby card collector for 49 years, Dwight Cleveland, who built and sold the largest private archive in 2016, but he still owns thousands of lobby cards where women have played significant roles in front of and behind the camera. And he partnered. You may remember his name because in 2023 we had a brief pop-up on Anime Wong, and he had lent us 15 of his lobby cards for that exhibit. So at this time, I want to mention two little housekeeping things. One is remember any questions you may have. At the end, we hope we'll have time for questions. And we'll try to keep track. And second, we have subtitles, and the spoken voice is converted into Chinese characters at the bottom. And my Chinese speaking friends tell me that it's highly accurate unless an English speaker attempts to say something in Chinese, which completely befuddles the artificial intelligence. So besides that, we are all set, and we're happy to have the talk. And why don't we take it away, Katie?
Great. Thank you so much for your introduction and for having me here today. I'm always thrilled to be talking about Anime Wong, as you can assume. Next slide, please. So, who was Anime Wong? She was born Wong Liu Song. I don't know if that's going to confuse. Oh, see, it's already confusing the subtitles. She was born Wong Liu Song in 1905 in Los Angeles, and her Chinese name translates loosely to frosted yellow willows in English. She was the daughter of a laundryman, and in fact, both of her parents were born in Northern California. So the way that I would count that, I would consider her third generation Chinese American. And she was the first American-born Asian actor to play a leading role in a Hollywood production. Across her 4-decade career, she worked in nearly every medium. She started in silent films, transitioned seamlessly into talkies, later did radio, live theater, and then television in the 1950s. So as you can imagine, working in all of those mediums, she, crossed off a number of milestones. Next slide, please. So here's some photographs of, Anime Wong's family in, very early years, circa 1925. Anime is actually the young woman in the far right, standing behind her father, Wong Sam-sing, and her eldest sister, Lulu, is standing on the far left. So she grew up in a very working class family. Her father owned a laundry, which you see pictured on the right. And as anyone who has grown up in a working class family that runs their own business knows, when the children aren't at school, they're also a part of the business. So as she was growing up, her and her older sister Lulu, who were very close, they used to help out a lot at the laundry. They would make deliveries all throughout Los Angeles of the clean clothing to various customers. And at that time, when she's a little girl, also coincided when film studios from the East Coast in New York and New Jersey were just moving to Los Angeles. At the time, most films were shot outside because they were using natural light to light them. So they realized that by moving to Los Angeles, they could shoot films all year round because it's sunny almost every day of the year. The weather is great, and there was also a very diverse terrain. So as she's making these deliveries, she's watching these film crews set up shop on the streets of downtown Los Angeles, also in Chinatown, where they're very often filming because, well, Chinatown provides free atmosphere. They don't have to build a set. They can just show up and, make use of this, quote unquote, exotic background. So Anime Wong sees this, and from a very young age, Not only is she watching them make films in the street and asking a lot of questions, she gets the reputation of being the curious Chinese child. But she's also, using some of her lunch money or the tip money she gets from making deliveries to go down to the Nickelodeons downtown in Los Angeles and watching these flickers play from reel to reel. So by the time she's age 11, she's decided that she is going to be a movie star, and she's very determined. Next slide, please. So little by little, she is working her way into the films, doing extra parts. She gets her first extra bit part in 1919 in a film called The Red Lantern. What I have pictured here on the far left is a clipping from the Los Angeles Times in 1921. This is one of the first interviews that she gives after she's gotten a few bit parts and starting to get noticed. But it sets the theme for a lot of her early career and the types of responses she gets as a Chinese American actress. She's quite unusual to most people, right? People are not familiar with this idea that you could be both Chinese and American, right? That you could be born in America and yet have a Chinese background and be fluent in both cultures in certain ways. And so they're writing up these articles about her. I always love to read the headline. Maid of Orient, unspoiled by success, dips her ivory hands in suds. So there you can tell how they're subtly exoticizing her, which becomes a theme in many of these articles. They describe her as this beautiful Chinese maiden who looks like something out of a poetry book from, the 12th century. And but as soon as she opens her mouth, she completely ruins the illusion because she speaks like any young woman from the era. She speaks like a flapper. And that in many ways was her way of subverting people's expectations of her, right? They saw her as Chinese, but when she opened her mouth, she was American. And so she really embraces the flapper persona in her early career. As you see on the far right in the photograph, she's like every bit the flapper with her cloche hat and the dress at her knees and her Mary Janes. So that was very much her persona in her early career. I have also pictured here a shot from one of the early films she did in a supporting role at age 15. I mean, that's how young she was when she gets into movies, which you see here in Dinty. Next slide. So two films were really important in her early career. The first of those is called The Toll of the Sea, which was the second Technicolor film ever made. And she got the leading role in this film at age 17, which is really incredible. And one of the reasons this even happened, because at the time, a lot of Hollywood studios were perfectly happy to cast white actresses to play Asian characters in yellowface. So one of the reasons this actually happens is because Technicolor is making this film to demonstrate their technology. They want to show off the color film that they have created, and Technicolor is run by scientists. So they're dumping a lot of money into this project, and they're not really concerned with box office names. They don't need a bunch of famous people. They want to show off the ability of their film stock. And they've chosen specifically a Madame Butterfly tale, which they, normally would be set in Japan. They set it in China, with the specific intention of making use of these very rich and, beautifully colored backdrops. So you have a lot of Chinese antiques, embroidered clothing. I mean, you can see here from the photograph just how powerful the color is. So they really want to make use of the costumes. And part of that too is to show off the natural color. So in that sense, they wanted to have Asian actors actually play the Asian characters. So this opens up a huge opportunity for Anna May Wong, which I think she is very cognizant of, even at 17. And she's given this opportunity, gives a virtuoso performance in the film, is able to cry on cue in front of the camera very beautifully and moving. And she gets rave reviews from the New York Times. Imagine being 17 and unknown and getting a review by the New York Times. And they say 9 out of 10 times this role would have been botched, but hers is the 10th performance, and she deserved to be seen again on the screen. So it's a huge boost for her. Because of this film, another person who sees it is Douglas Fairbanks. He's one of the most famous people in Hollywood and around the world. He's an actor, not only an actor, but he's also producing his own films, and he has a huge movie studio out in Los Angeles. And so he sees her performance in The Toll of the Sea, and he's just about to cast for his Arabian Nights themed blockbuster called The Thief of Bagdad, and he's specifically looking for exotic types. He sees Anna May Wong's talent and he casts her in what becomes her unlikely breakout role, the Mongol slave, for The Thief of Baghdad in 1924. And you can see her right here to the right. She's very scantily clad, probably wearing the least amount of clothes compared to anyone in the film except for Douglas Fairbanks himself, who is, as you can see, bare-chested. But she has a number of very memorable scenes, and this launches her career in Hollywood and to international stardom. Next slide. So we'll play a few clips from some of her early films, including the ones I just spoke about, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Can stop the film here, please. Next slide. I know many of you could probably keep watching. That's just how magnetic Anime Wong is on screen. But that video compilation was actually made by a fan named Rebecca Grace Lee, and she has an entire YouTube channel that's dedicated to Anime Wong. So if you'd like to see more of these films and other ones, I would highly recommend going to that. It's free, and they're actually pretty high quality. You can watch a lot of her films and some of her television shows as well. So check that out. So Anime Wong is launched to stardom by Thief of Bagdad, and something happens, a film that she becomes involved in quickly after that, is a part of her beginning to understand what it means not only to be a Chinese American actress, but also just to be a Chinese American, period. And so she's cast in a film called The Alaskan in 1924. And one of the cameramen is also James Wong Howe, who later becomes an Academy Award winning cinematographer and one of the first Asian Americans to win the Oscar. Next slide. So as part of this crew, they're actually, instead of going all the way to Alaska, they're going to Canada to film the Alaskan. And when the cast and crew gets to the border just before they're about to board a ship to Canada, they realize that they have a problem because this is the era of Chinese exclusion, which means that any Chinese person of Chinese descent in America, whether you were born there or not, must have appropriate papers. You need to have identity papers, and you actually have to apply for permission in order to leave the country if you'd like to return. So this is Anime Wong's first brush with the Chinese exclusion. Because they're part of this big Hollywood film crew, somehow things are resolved, and she and James Wong Howe apparently get the appropriate papers and are allowed to go to Canada to shoot the film and then return to the US. So what you see here on the left are Anime Wong's identity papers, which as you can read, are issued to her at the port of Seattle in Washington. She's 19 years old. And then the form on the right, which is from several years later, is an example of Form 430, which as a Chinese American is the application you would have to make if you wanted to leave the country and then later wanted to return. So this was a pretty onerous process. It had to be approved. And then upon re-entry into the country, you would be submitted to an interrogation and asked a number of questions about your family members, about your own situation, what you did professionally, where you lived. Oftentimes they would show you photographs of people and ask you to identify them. Sometimes, in one case in Anime Wong's situation, she was shown a photograph of someone who had claimed to be her brother, who was not. And she confirmed that this person is indeed not my brother. So in any case, you can imagine, Anime Wong was probably one of the most famous Chinese Americans of this era, and even she had to go through this process. So you can imagine how much more difficult it would have been just for average, everyday Chinese Americans who had to go through this. Next slide. So at the same time that, she's starting to understand that she's treated as a second-class citizen, she's also starting to hit a wall in Hollywood. Her fame was, she had this meteoric rise. She gets a lot of parts in many films, but there's a trend to them, right? They're always bit parts. She's playing exotic dancing girls. She's a bit of a floozy, she often has to die in these films because none of the interracial love stories can be consummated. This is also a time during which interracial marriage is illegal in America. And even when she's in more positive roles, she's really just playing background characters. So for example, if you see the image on the top right, that's a publicity still for the film called Mr. Wu, and it's with Renee Adoree. So Renee Adoree was a white actress who was cast to play the lead in Yellowface, whereas Anime Wong is just a side character. In this publicity still, I think they jokingly say, Anime Wong is teaching Renee Adoree how to read Chinese. In another version of this, they have Anime Wong teaching Renee Adoree how to use chopsticks. So, there's a little bit of they're asking her not only to be in these films, but to also do cultural training and sensitivity training for the other actors, which I don't think she was paid for. And then you can see here as well, the ad in the center for the Chinese Parrot, which was actually an early Charlie Chan film. Anime Wong is pictured very prominently, making people think, oh, she's going to be in this film. I want to see her in this film, for Anime Wong. But in fact, even though this is a lost film, we know from reviews that she plays this dancing girl at the very beginning of the film and is quickly killed off. So studios knew that she was popular because they were using her name and they were giving her visible billing. They were using her to lure people into the theaters, but then they wouldn't give her the screen time to match. And she believed in herself. She felt that she was talented. A lot of other people, directors and her co-stars, believed that she was also very talented. So she starts to get fed up with this by 1928. Next slide. So this is an interview that she gives with one of the movie magazines. And, she says, to tell the truth, I'm Chinese by race and I love Chinese people and things. My only regret is the limitation upon my work, as I can only play Oriental roles or sometimes Indian parts, as you saw earlier with the Peter Pan film. Hayakawa, and she's referring here to Sasu Hayakawa, very, very famous Japanese actor. Hayakawa's stardom failed because he was never allowed to kiss the heroine. The fans wouldn't have stood for it. Again, this is the issue with interracial relationships on screen. They can't be consummated. So then her interviewer says, but surely when no one objects to seeing an American kiss a pretty little Chinese girl, like you, hint, hint. But she says, no, not if she is impersonated by an American in yellowface. But someday, here's where you see her stubbornness and her determinedness come out. She says, but someday someone will write a story demanding a real Chinese girl. Then perhaps I'll have my chance. Next slide. So by this point, she's started to socialize with a lot of interesting people in Hollywood, a lot of expats from England and Germany, and they're really smitten with her and they see her talent. And so she actually gets an offer to do a starring film in Germany at UFA, the premier film studio. The screenwriter has written a story specifically for her. And so this becomes a big opportunity, and she really has to consider it. She's 23. The farthest away from home she's ever gone is Canada. She doesn't speak a word of German. And there's a possibility that if she leaves Hollywood, she could return and no one might remember her anymore. Maybe she won't get work. So it's certainly a huge risk. But she's the kind of person who bets on herself. And so in the end, she decides that she's going to go. And so you see her here with her older sister, Lulu. They're very cutely posed. That's on their way to New York, where they then catch a ship to Hamburg in Germany. And then in the clipping in the center, you see from a German film magazine, you see Anna May Wong arriving by train. She's got a bouquet of flowers in her hand, and the headline says, "I'm very happy." And the article, talks about how instantly she was embraced in Germany. People are very excited not only to have a Hollywood movie star, but this very beautiful, interesting Chinese American Hollywood star, right? She's a complete novelty to them. I mean, there aren't a lot of Chinese immigrants in Germany at this time, so she's really quite unusual. And people are excited to see her, and there's not the same type of race issues as there are in America. And so the first film she makes is called Song. It's actually retitled Song in honor of her Chinese name, Wong Liu Song. And it comes out the summer of 1928. And at the premiere, she receives a 20-minute standing ovation and later recalls that in that moment, she felt like she was having an out-of-body experience and, becomes this overnight sensation in Germany. Next slide. And essentially does the same thing all across of Europe. She then goes to London, where she makes a film called Piccadilly, and she's all the rage in society circles there. You can see a photograph of her here going to Limehouse, which was the Chinese quarter in London at the time. All of the magazines are featuring her. I mean, her fashion, her look, her bangs is basically the trend that everyone is trying to imitate. So you see her here modeling the Chinese silk shawls as well as silk pajama suits. So chinoiserie, is really in vogue during this period because of her. There are also a number of photographers and artists who are basically lining up because they want to capture her image through their art. So there's a number of famous images and paintings and portraits that are made of her during this time. And then she also makes her first talking films, which is actually quite notable because not only does she make the film in sound in English, but she also re-records the film with a German cast in German and then with a French cast in French. So she makes her sound debut in 3 languages. Next slide. So during this time, she ends up staying in Europe for nearly 3 years. And by the time that she returns to the US, she sails back to New York. Um, People have started to hear about her triumph in Europe, right? Because everyone's been raving about her there. So by the time she lands in New York, she's literally, walking through customs when a Broadway producer accosts her and says, "Hey, we're about to produce this play about a Chicago gangster, and he has a Chinese girlfriend. We'd love you to play the part." And she signs on right there and has 2 weeks to essentially learn all of her lines and make her debut on Broadway, which she does to incredible results. The play is a huge hit, ends up staying for almost 5 months. They also traveled around the country. So by the time she actually gets back to Hollywood, it's nearly 3 years that she's been gone. It's the summer of 1931, and Paramount is finally ready to give her a contract. So they give her a 2 picture deal, and they basically want to give her this, her first Hollywood starring role since The Toll of the Sea, and give her this big, leading lady treatment. Unfortunately, the film that they put her in is called Daughter of the Dragon, and it's a Fu Manchu story. She's playing the daughter of Fu Manchu and, out to avenge her father's death. So it's a very kind of lurid, fantastical comic book type story. They do bring in Sesu Hayakawa to play the romantic lead, as you see pictured here. And Travis Banton, the head costume designer at Paramount, designs all of her looks. So that, in that sense, the film is very fabulous. You can tell they put a lot of money into it. But the unfortunate thing is that you can see the limitation of Hollywood's imagination, right? The best that they can do for Anna May Wong is see her as the daughter of Fu Manchu. They can't give her a character that would have more humanity. And then just a quick note about the photograph on the right. As you can see, it's autographed by Anna May Wong. This includes a phrase that she sometimes used where she would write "Orientally yours," and this was a wink, meant to make light of the fact that she understood being Chinese and playing up her Asianness was a part of what made her interesting and popular to the American public. But unfortunately, Hollywood very much pigeonholed her in those types of roles. Next slide. So after her big starring vehicle with Daughter of the Dragon, she then plays a smaller role in Shanghai Express with Marlene Dietrich, which is a really excellent film. But unfortunately, after that, Paramount lets her contract lapse and they do not re-sign her. So 1932 ends up being a very difficult year for her. And ironically, that year, you see a ton of films being made about China because there is an ongoing conflict between Japan and China at that time. Unfortunately, though, Anna May Wong in a role in any of those films. And so here on the left, we actually see one of her personal letters to her friend Carl Van Vechten. And so she's saying to him, "I made a test at MGM Studios for the leading role in The Son Daughter. I guess I look too Chinese to play a Chinese because I hear Colleen Moore is going to do it." And in the end, Helen Hayes actually played the part, which is the woman who's pictured here. And then Ramon Navarro played the other leading part. He was a Mexican-American actor. So they're both in yellowface. So you can see the types of challenges she was up against in the 1930s, where they preferred to cast other actors to play Asian roles in yellowface. So during this time, next slide, and there's another important development that many of you may be familiar with. A book called The Good Earth by Pearl Buck is published. Pearl Buck was the daughter of American missionaries. She grew up in China, spoke the language fluently, was very familiar with rural Chinese life. And so she ends up writing this novel that's deeply sympathetic about 2 Chinese peasant farmers. And unexpectedly, it becomes a huge bestseller in the US. Partially one of the reasons a lot of readers said, the characters are so relatable. They don't even seem like they're Chinese. They don't seem foreign. So, it was kind of eye-opening to people that, oh, we could think of these people as like ourselves. And so in that sense, the book did very well. It fostered a deeper understanding of Chinese to some extent. And, she won the Pulitzer for this book. So it was a huge blockbuster of a book. And Irving Thalberg, who is the boy genius at MGM Studios at the time, sees the success of the book and decides that he's going to adapt it into an epic Hollywood film. Next slide. So here's where I go back to, that quote from Anna May Wong's earlier interview, right? With The Good Earth, you would think, here is finally the role that she always imagined, right? A story demanding a real Chinese girl. This is her chance. And Anna May Wong, she has a lot of friends in the media who are rooting for her. So they start to pipe up in their columns in newspapers and magazines saying, who do you think is going to play the leading female role of Olan? Shouldn't it be Anna May Wong? I mean, she's the only Chinese American actress of stature. Everyone knows her. So this goes on for a number of years. But of course, as you can probably guess, unfortunately, that's not how things end up. Next slide. So MGM ultimately decides to cast 2 European American actors to play the leads in Yellowface. You can see them here, Louise Reiner and Paul Muni. Paul Muni, I really had to be convinced to play the role. He didn't think he could play someone Chinese convincingly, to his credit. And Louise Reiner had just been brought over from Germany. She was still learning English, but apparently that was completely fine for her, whereas a lot of the Chinese extras were either told they were too Chinese because they didn't speak American English, or they were not Chinese enough because they appeared to be too Americanized. And so despite these hypocrisies, MGM, Irving Thalberg, he said that he really wanted to create an authentic portrait of the Chinese. And so they did make a lot of efforts to learn about Chinese culture. They sent scouts to China, who not only auditioned a lot of people, but they ended up buying up some farms wholesale and shipping them back to Los Angeles. They bought 500 acres of land in Chatsworth, which they then converted into farmland. I mean, they hired extras from Chinatown to then not only appear as extras, but to actually work the land and actually help create the farm. So they went to all these great lengths. They studied the dress, the hairstyles, all of these different details. I mean, you see here with the ad for Max Factor makeup, they were even bragging about how realistic their yellow face makeup looked. So to them, that was the peak of authenticity, except for the glaring, issue is that they couldn't bring themselves to cast Asian actors in the lead roles. I mean, yes, this film did give roles to a lot of Chinese American actors in, supporting roles and as extras, but they couldn't play the leads. They do ask Anna May Wong to audition for one of the supporting roles, but in the end, she decides that she's not going to be a part of this film. Next slide. So instead, in 1936, she decides to take her first trip to China, and she's really producing this as a counter narrative to what MGM is doing with The Good Earth. So just as they begin production on the film, she is sailing to Shanghai, and we see her as she arrives here on the left from a clipping from a Chinese movie magazine. You can see the hordes of people who were there waiting for her. She is also writing a 5-part series about her travels in China for the New York Herald Tribune, which is then syndicated throughout the country. And she hires a cameraman who documents her travels, and she later turns that into a documentary that she narrates. So she spends altogether about 10 months in China, and this is really an opportunity for her as a Chinese American to finally connect with her Chinese roots. She's always wanted to understand what it really means to be Chinese, and so she's, making trips to all of these different famous places in the country. She spends the summer in Beijing, where she has a home with a gated garden. She really loves the gardens there. And then you can see that she's pictured in a friend's moon gate, which is something that she loves so much that when she returns to Los Angeles and builds a home in Santa Monica, she builds her own moon gate to her garden and actually names her entire home Moon Gate. And then she also is studying Mandarin, learning about she makes visits to the children's opera school in Beijing, and learning about Chinese opera. And then, as you see pictured here, she also goes out into the countryside to meet with real Chinese farmers. And so in my book, I spend a lot of time on both her trip to China as well as the making of The Good Earth, because to me, it's really a split screen of, Hollywood's fabricated version of China and then the real version that Anna May Wong herself goes and visits. Next slide. So she has a deeply meaningful experience in China. I think she said it was, one of the most important things she ever did. And she comes back a changed person. Because while she was in China and while people were really excited to meet her, she does experience a lot of criticism, especially from, the elite, the newspaper columnists, and they're really upset with her for all of the roles that she's played in her early career, where she was not wearing a lot of clothes, where she was playing, disreputable roles, things like that. And they were constantly asking her, well, why did you play these parts that make us look bad? Because you represent us and you represent, Asian women everywhere, which of course is an impossible responsibility for one person to have. But I think despite knowing that a lot of these complaints were really not fair, she takes them in stride. She really listens to what they have to say. And she begins to understand that whether she likes it or not, she really is a symbol for people all over the world. Because when they see her on screen, she is, in a sense, representing all Asian women everywhere. So because of this, she comes back with a changed perspective on her career and what it means. So she comes out and says very publicly that she's no longer going to play unsympathetic parts in her films. And also that Hollywood won't cast Chinese actors for Chinese roles. And that is really her way of saying, Hollywood is racist. And this is not okay, which I think was a very brave thing for her to do in the late 1930s. It wasn't like anyone else was making those kinds of statements. And the thing that's really impressive is that she's actually able to parlay all of this into a new series of films at Paramount. And the way that she does this is also, again, something that she's learned in China while she was on her trip. She runs into her friend Warner Oland, who is a Swedish actor famous for playing Charlie Chan. And so she sees his reception in China. They're very excited to meet him. Everyone loves Charlie Chan. He's a detective, he solves crimes, he's a positive role model. And so they roll out the red carpet for him. They don't have a bad word to say about him. They even tell Warner, oh, you actually look Chinese. You could be one of us. And poor Anna May, meanwhile, is being criticized, being told she looks old, that her clothes are ugly, that she doesn't know anything about Chinese history and should be deported, blah, blah, blah. But anyways, you can see how the wheels in her mind work, because she sees this and very cleverly goes back to Paramount and says to them, why can't I play a female version of Charlie Chan? And so while she doesn't get a detective series per se, she does go on to do a series of films where she's playing Chinese American heroines who bust various crimes. And the first of those films is called Daughter of Shanghai in 1937, which you see photographed here. She's with Philip Ahn, who was a Korean American actor, and they were actually childhood friends. So they get to play the leading roles in this film. And he's actually playing an FBI agent, which someone noted to me predates an actual Asian American becoming an FBI agent by several decades. So in that sense, the story is truly visionary, right? She's imagining what Asian Americans could do in the future. And she flips the script because all of the villains are played by white actors. And unlike her earlier films where she had to die, she actually gets her happy ending. So it's a really, in my opinion, radical film for 1937. And it's also a lot of fun. And so one of the ways that she was able to do this is that these films were B movies. So they were lower budgets, shorter runtime. They only about an hour long. So because of the stakes were lower, she had more influence in actually shaping the story. One other film I'll mention that's from this period is King of Chinatown from 1939, which I really love. It's a fictionalized biopic of Dr. Margaret Chung, who was the first Chinese American to become a doctor. And so she's playing this modern surgeon, but there's a lot of nice scenes portraying Chinese American life. She has this banter with her father, who owns a traditional herbal medicine shop. And so he's the old school doctor, and she's the new doctor. She invites her hospital colleagues home for Chinese New Year dinner. So things like that I think are very touching. And again, not something you would normally see in 1930s cinema. Next slide. So that kind of gives you an overview of Anna May Wong's life and career. I mean, there is so much more that, of course, that she's done and accomplishes, but that is kind of like the greatest hits. And I'll just end with a few, by summarizing a few of these things, and also, I'll start by summarizing again that she was the first Chinese American to play a leading role in a Hollywood production, and that was The Toll of the Sea. First Chinese American movie star, probably cinema's first interracial kiss in a film called Java Head, which was made in the UK in 1934. And then with Philip Ahn in Daughter of Shanghai, they became the first Asian American actors to play a leading romantic couple in the Sound era. So that's, a huge milestone. And then as you see pictured here on the left, this is a behind the scenes photograph from a television show she did in 1951 called The Gallery of Madame Liu Song. And again, this was a story written for her, and she played a woman who had an art gallery and traveled around the world solving art crimes. Unfortunately, the tapes are lost, but was truly a revolutionary thing for her to do, and made her, the first Asian American to lead a television show. Next slide. And with that, I will conclude. I'll just mention quickly that, obviously there's much more in the book, but I also write a free newsletter on Substack called Half Caste Woman. So if you're really interested in Anna May Wong and in other Asian American people who were working in Hollywood, things like that, I write about those topics all of the time. And so that will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Well, Katie, I know I'm speaking for everyone here to say that we loved it, and it was so stimulating in terms of an endless number of thoughts and questions. During the rehearsal, you showed us her papers, and the question was asked whether she was a citizen or not. And then I think Elizabeth Cheney said, "What about the 14th Amendment, which guarantees birthright citizenship?" But it turns out that the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act circumvented the 14th Amendment, and so that Chinese people coming to the United States would not be able to be naturalized, and Chinese people born in the United States were not actually, by and large, given citizenship. They couldn't exercise the 14th Amendment rights. With some exceptions. And so it's not crystal clear about Anna May Wong. And then that got reversed in 1943 with the Magnuson Act, although the Magnuson Act did not, to any appreciable degree, allow for immigration of Chinese people. And that never happened until 1965 when Lyndon Johnson signed the Emanuel Seller written 1965 Immigration Act, which allowed for immigration from people from around the world. So I think that's sort of interesting. The other point I wanted to mention before we have Dwight talk is Hollywood's indifference and to minorities. And it didn't end in the 1930s or 1940s. I remember a Columbo episode on television from 1975 that involved a murder at an embassy in Los Angeles from a mythical Arab Middle Eastern country. And every single solitary person who was supposed to be an Arab person in the embassy was played by an American. Sal Mineo, the actor in those days, was the person who was murdered. He was supposed to be one of the people from that country. There was a boy, a teenager, who was the inherited king. He was played by an actor from New York named Barry Robbins. And the evil guy from the country who performed the murderer, was none other than Hector Elizondo. And so zero Arabs in that entire. It's fascinating how she was this trailblazer for everybody to come after her, and it took decades and decades and decades, and we're basically only seeing it now. So I think there's going to be a million questions when we're done. Right now, I'm dying to hear from Dwight, who is going to talk to us about uh, about lobby cards and advertising about Anime Wong that he has. And my first question to Dwight is, I'm so curious if he would tell us how he got started in this, in his fabulous collection of lobby cards and movie posters, uh, and um, and also tell us the difference between a lobby card and a movie poster. So, Dwight, we're anxious to hear from you, and I love your background, by the way.
Yes, well, in a minute you'll understand why there's a huge advantage to being in my one of my warehouses of posters, Bob. But thank you for that introduction. I want to thank the museum for inviting me back, and I especially want to thank Jacinta Wong for first letting me have this exhibition a year ago at the museum. It was really a fantastic treat for me. I love sharing these posters and lobby cards, and especially helping elevate Anime Wong's story. I think you mentioned in the introduction that I've got this large collection of lobby cards where women played an important role behind the camera, and it's really part of my new branding, uh, stepping into the 21st century, if you will, of elevating women's stories, and this is all part of that. So I got into this when I was in high school, and the art teacher at my high school was a collector, and he came back one day. He had things up in his office and gallery and home, and we all kind of made fun of this guy for this, quirky hobby that he had. But one day he came back from a buying trip, and he had this little group of lobby cards, and we were all looking over his shoulder, and he had this, which came up in our conversation during the practice session this morning. But this is a 11 by 14-inch lobby card from Wolf Song. This is Lupe Velez and Gary Cooper. This is Gary Cooper's last silent film. Sorry about the glare here, but this is in a archival little sleeve. But I just fell in love with this fully saturated color from Paramount Pictures. Here's their logo down here. I love this romantic embrace. I loved this Art Deco design and everything. And so I've spent the last 49 years tracking things like this down and finding things. It's just kind of my drug of choice, if you will. There are about 14 different standard size movie posters in the United States. Every country has their own set of standard sizes. So these lobby cards are really one of the more popular ones. The other one would probably be an American one sheet, which is what all of us are familiar with seeing out in front of a movie theater in those glass cases. Those measure 27 by 41 inches. So those are the main two sizes that people are familiar with. There are several others, though. There are 14 in total, some with very specific uses. And so I really fell in love with the artwork first, and that's what I started collecting, was things that I just love the artwork on. And I started with a couple of major stars, Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Mae West, William Powell, and Gary Cooper. And I became a completist. So it was kind of like wine verticals where you have one vintage, one chateau, and then you have the same wine in a number of different years. I wanted a lobby card from all of the films that these people were starring in. And I got many of the things with these initial 5 people, and then, I said this was my drug of choice. So it expanded into basically eventually all of the male and female stars from the 1930s. And that's really how I stumbled on Anime Wong, because she was one of the major stars. And so I started collecting those, and I'm going to share my screen right now. So can you all see this? Oh, whoops. Wait, here we go. There we go. All right. You can all see this now?
Yes, we
yeah.
can.
Okay, great. So this is basically 49 years worth of, collecting on Anime Wong. These things are incredibly rare, and I do apologize for their lack of being in chronological order. So lobby cards come in sets of 8, and one of them is a title card, which is kind of like a mini poster. And then there are 7 scene cards, which essentially give you a small summary of the film. And you would have bought your ticket, hopefully a thing of popcorn and maybe a drink, and you would have been milling around in the lobby of the theater waiting for your movie to start. And they would have these lobby cards up in a case in the lobby or one of those tripod displays, and you could view them up close and personal. So you could sort of scrutinize these. And again, I apologize. I'll kind of bounce around a little bit. So I apologize for these not being in chronological order. But Katie mentioned Dinty from 1920. This is anime right here. And like I said, many of these are one of a kind. There are no other examples of these. That's how rare these posters are. They were put up to advertise a film for 3 or 4 days. Some of them were recycled, but after that, they had no value whatsoever. They were thrown out. They were put down in the basement of a movie theater where they were flooded. They were recycled during World War I and World War II during paper drives. So it's a miracle that any of them survived. Here's Toll of the Sea, which Katie also mentioned. This is the title card. And then these are 4 scene cards. These are, the only 5 cards that are known to exist. Here's where the logo is Technicolor Motion Picture Corporation. What I find very interesting about this is that this technology that we're all familiar with now started out as a movie studio. And instead of taking the risk and continuing to produce movies after this, they really just evolved into a technology that all the studios eventually tapped into. The other interesting thing about this film is that it was written by Frances Marion, who became one of the most successful screenwriters in Hollywood. She eventually married Fred Thompson, who was a major Western movie star. But she, I think, must have played a role in casting Anna May Wong in this film. She wrote it. Katie told you the theme of the movie, so they really was perfect for casting a Chinese actress in this film. And you can get a feel for some of these awesome costumes. Here's one of them. I can't ask for a show of hands, but all of these were up on display at your museum over a year ago. So you could have gotten very close to these. Here's the closest to a portrait card that I've got, but you can see how wonderful all of these are. All these others, Katie mentioned King of Chinatown. This is a portrait card. When you were born, I think this is 1937 or 38. This is Columbia Pictures when she came back to the United States. Dangerous to Know, Daughter of Shanghai. Again, there are scene cards that are kind of far away shots from all these, but I only collect these portrait cards and title cards. This is kind of interesting. This is also from Daughter of Shanghai, but this is from the other company. So some of the smaller movie theaters around the country, they didn't have the budget to get to lease these cards from Paramount. This alternate, we do live in a capitalist society, so there's always a cheaper purveyor, and the other company was that company for smaller theaters. So you can see there's no studio name on here. This is not sanctioned by Paramount. Java Head, this is the title card, 1934. Chu Chin Chow. I think this was, what year was this? 1934. Here's that 1931 Daughter of the Dragon with Anna May over here. 40 Winks. This is not Anna May Wong, but this is the title card. This gives you a great feel for, this mid 1920s artwork, which is sort of what I fell in love with at the very beginning. Let's see. Launch meeting. What's happening here? More. This is a later one. Bombs Over Broadway. Whoops. Did I? What
We're
happened?
back again.
Are we back?
You're good.
Back
Okay. Island of Lost Men here again. Here's the title card and then a couple of scene cards. And you can see she's in all of these. Here she is here she is, here she is. But you can see how small this is. So you can see how appealing, these portrait cards are and these title cards. This is the last thing that I acquired on her. This is a title card from the serial from the 40th Door, and this is Pathé Pictures, the French studio. This is from 19. What is this, Katie? 40th Door. I can't remember what film. I think it's 1924.
That might even be a lost film. I don't even know if that's like listed on IMDb as one of her films. So it would probably be, yeah, very early, like early 1920s.
Yeah, so here she is here on the title card. And let's see, how do I get back here? Stop sharing. So I have that card here to show you. And here she is here. So I found in my travels, which sort of go all over the world. This is a hobby for me. So I bid on things. I just bought something from Amsterdam this morning. But I'm buying things all the time and going to shows and conferences and stuff to trade with people. I bought this is a serial. So let me show this to you again. This is chapter 8 in the serial. So I bought, I think like maybe 75 cards from this serial, all different serials. And of those, there were only 4 that pictured her. This is the best one of all of them. But that's kind of what the type of things that I have to do in order to, get something that I really want. And it's all just sort of a big treasure hunt and everything. But I've had a great time doing it. And part of the satisfaction as a collector now is sharing them with everybody. And that was what was so rewarding about the exhibition that we had down in San Diego. That led to an extended exhibition, which Katie was also involved with in Los Angeles. And there are a couple of other things planned. But all aspects of my collection are available. And I gave a presentation to the Art Institute of Chicago earlier this last week. I own some things on another silent star that was part of an exhibition at a museum here in Chicago. So we're doing a screening and showing this coming Wednesday. And the great thing now is I just never know what's around the next bend in terms of sharing things. So with that, thanks again for having me.
Well, all I can say is this has been a wonderful day so far. We're not finished. First, we had the wonderful talk about by Katie and her book, Not Your China Doll, and your collection. I have to say, Dwight, on talking to you, I'm reminded of Edwin Binney III. And Edwin Binney III is the grandson of the inventor of crayons and Crayola. And he was an inveterate collector of Indian miniatures. And he had the same passion for Indian miniatures that you have for lobby cards. And he wanted to collect Indian miniatures from every part of India and every era. And he did it. And when he died, the San Diego Museum of Art was the lucky recipient of 1,453 Indian miniatures, and we probably have more than any other museum in the United States. And he had the same. I mean, when I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of his passion, and he would go around the world collecting. You would see gaps in his collection, and he had to get a certain area of India. He had to get some Deccan stuff from the 1730s, and he would go anywhere around the world to get it. You must be in demand, Dwight, with this unique collection of yours.
Well, like I said, I never know what's around the next corner. There was actually a film scholar from Canada who was here a couple of weeks ago, and she was interviewing me, and I was showing her things from the women behind the camera during the silent film era collection. And we stumbled on, this actor, and she happened to be curating this little film festival. And that's what led to, this thing that's coming up. And so I never know what's around the next corner. And that's what's really exciting about it for me, because as a collector, I feel like a lot of my fellow collectors of this, in that we're sort of stuck in nostalgia back, 100 years ago. But now with these exhibitions and discussion groups and things like that, and especially with this women's theme, I feel like I'm kind of like stepping into the 21st century. I did you talk about donations. I've given extensive donations to the Library of Congress, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and I did an artificial intelligence project with Dartmouth College. They were nice enough after this to give me an honorary curatorial position there, which was kind of nice. But during COVID, I bought 25,000 of these lobby cards from the silent era, and I whittled them down to the women behind the camera, and then I had about 10,000 extras. And I stumbled on this guy. I was at a women's film conference actually in New York, and this gentleman who's the head of the film department at Dartmouth gave a presentation, and he talked about this media ecology project where we were digitizing all these silent film images. And I had these 10,000 lobby cards that were left over from all this stuff that I had bought, and I really didn't know what to do with it. And so he coincidentally was sitting right behind me. He gave his presentation, he came back, he sat right behind me. And, after things had calmed down, I just turned around and said, "Are you interested in, these 10,000 things that I really don't know what I'm going to do with them?" And so we did that, and then I ultimately gave those to the Library of Congress. But it's just fun, it's the gift that keeps giving.
Well, this is all very important. Katie, your research and your book, and Dwight, your card collections are, I feel personally, vitally important, and more so as every year goes by, because of the new way knowledge is being acquired in the 21st century. And young people have a completely different fund of knowledge than older people. And for a variety of reasons, they're just as smart, but it's a different era. And we gave a talk from our China American Experience and Beyond a couple months ago on the China-Burma-India theater in World War II. Zero recognition of this topic by anyone under 50. And no one's ever heard of the China-Burma-India theater, very important aspect of World War II. And if you talk to a younger person, they'll say, "Yeah, I don't need to know that. I mean, I can Google it if I need to." And in fact, let me Google it right now, and they'll Google it right in front of you to show you that they're able to pull up the information, but they don't know it, and they can't use that information in decision making as to whether AI is going to make things better or worse. Remains to be seen. But as I see it, the work that both Katie and Dwight are doing becomes more important than ever because of the alteration in knowledge acquisition in the 21st century, which I find to be, everyone who is older is aware of this, but it's clearly going to continue and progress. What are your thoughts about this, each of you? How about Katie first?
Well, I mean, I have to say I am one of those people who's under 50. But I
You're
actually
an
am.
exception.
Right, I'm an exception. I realize that. Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I wrote this book, really, because when I first learned about Anna May Wong, I was 19, which is about more than 20 years ago now. And I saw a photograph of her at the Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles, which again, the importance of institutions like yours in San Diego and the Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles and across the country, that's how we learn about this history. So I saw the photograph, asked, who is this woman? And was told, oh, she was this, internationally famous Chinese American movie star from the 1920s. And it totally blew my mind as a 19-year-old. And I was like, how come no one ever told me about this person, right? And then I went around asking people and saying, well, do you know who Anna May Wong is? And nobody knew who she was anymore. And that really, it kind of infuriated me because I mean, I wanted to know who she was. And I was like, how can no one know who she is? She was a really important cinema star, a pioneer of early Hollywood. And so writing the book was my own contribution to say essentially like, hey, everyone, you got to know about this person. She's really important to our history.
Dwight, what are your thoughts about this issue of preserving the past and your, as I see it, integral role in society?
Yeah, well, one of the things that didn't come up earlier is that most of these, all of these silent films were made on nitrate film stock, which is flammable and just sort of can self-destruct. I've actually seen demonstrations where it's been ignited and then put in water and it still burns. That's how dangerous it is. And so 85% of all the silent films that were made in the world are lost. They don't exist. There's no record whatsoever. And so what that means is that these lobby cards are the only tangible evidence that many of these films even existed. You can do a lot of the research. Katie shared with us some great research of magazine articles and film reviews and things like that that you can do. But in terms of something tangible connected directly to the movies, these lobby cards and the posters are really the only thing that even are out there anymore. So that's why it's so important to preserve these. And that's what's interesting about this Dartmouth program, because they're actually going to digitize all these images. And then, like in the case of Anna May Wong, they're going to have this, everybody loves all this detailed information. How short is her skirt? Is she wearing a hat? Is she smoking? Is she on a bicycle? Is there a car in the scene? And they collect all this data, and then they're going to actually use it as a teaching tool in terms of grouping things in different ways by directors or actors or actresses, cinematographers, and it'll all be digitized, so they'll be able to tell it what to do, or things like I mentioned Francis Marion. They can figure out some of the compare the script to these images and see what trends there are and use it as a big teaching tool. So that's why these lobby cards are just so critically important to have and to keep and to preserve.
Oh, it's an amazing world we live in. Elizabeth Cheney, have you been looking at the comments in the chat box? I'm sure there are endless, because this is such a endlessly stimulating talk. And oh, by the way, Katie, is there clarity as to whether Anna May Wong was a citizen or not?
Well, I mean, I think this is a very complicated question. I personally would consider her a citizen because she was born here, and if that
Oh,
doesn't
she
make
was an American. I mean,
yeah,
of
yeah,
course,
no,
but
I mean,
I meant
I think
technically.
right. I think the issue is whether you would bring the case to the Supreme Court and they would have to make the decision, because obviously they said with Wong King Ark, right? If that's his, or the Wong Ark, the Wong Kim Ark case, which establishes birthright citizenship, he was considered a citizen, even though that was during the Chinese Exclusion Act. But I agree, it's very complicated. There's a lot of gray area because I think most Chinese Americans, they didn't have, they had Chinese, an identity of a certificate of identity, which was not the same thing as having a passport or having, I guess, what other Americans had, right? And so that is the kind of the gray area. So personally, I would consider her a citizen. And then, it's really a question of whether what are the legal, I mean, I think you'd have to, like I said, you'd have to pursue it to the Supreme Court in order to get a straight answer on it. And I can tell you from recently looking into my own family's immigration or Chinese exclusion files, even my own grandfather, who was not born here, but all of his siblings were, and he came here at the age of 9. I don't think he ever had a passport. I mean, he died in 1999. He had a certificate of identity as a Chinese American, and so I think that again just reiterates the fact that Chinese Americans were always treated as second class citizens or not even as citizens, right? And I think that, you can also tie that to things that are going on now with immigration. So is this conversation about immigration, I mean, in a way started with the Chinese and has, always been ongoing.
Well, right. And of course, it's very subjective. In my opinion, it's a shameful chapter in American history, but it started in the 1700s. We had laws passed in the 1700s, anti-French, to keep the French out. Elizabeth, do we have some questions or comments, or actually questions, hopefully, from the audience?
Well, there's a lot of activity in the chat box, and I will recognize Katie. I see that you have responded to, I think, quite a few of the comments, which are mostly, I guess, kind of praising the rigor of the research behind your talk. There's one person who has a question. I want to, I guess what I will do is I will call, or there are a couple of people who have a question. I'd first like to call on Caroline Chin. You had a comment talking about Anna May Wong's role as a kind of trailblazer, and I wonder if you'd like to elaborate. Do you need help with your microphone? There you are.
Yeah, hey, Katie, it's been such a wonderful experience listening to you and sharing your research. And I'm definitely ordering your book for sure for my next reading at my spare time. I mentioned in my chat is that I really admire that she's such a trailblazer in her times, and being a Chinese American at those days, and also get into the film business, which is amazingly, it just words cannot describe that, how great that you investing your time and energy to bring this culture treasure to us. I'm married to a American Chinese, and he totally, absolutely have no knowledge about who Anna May Wong is. So I'm sure after today, yeah, Bob, you know Stephen, um, and I'll definitely bring this to all the people that I know of, and introduce the storyline. And Dwight, again, forgive my ignorance. I've never known what these lobby cards are. So I learned so much. Thank you for sharing that poster with all those treasures. Those are culture treasures, and particularly you have collection of anime one. It's just amazing. So all I can say is thank you both for sharing your treasure and your interest, and it just gave us so much pleasure and knowledge about what we're missing. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Elizabeth, what have we got?
So there are two questions that I detect. I think so. Kathy G would like to ask her question. Would you like to turn on your microphone?
Yes. Hi. My name is Kathy. I'm a rising senior in high school, and we of often like API people, which is like for example, that anime wongs are often untold in traditional school educational institutions unless you like voluntarily look for it. So I guess my question for Katie is like, how do you think learning about Anna's story changed your perspective towards people like her? And how would you recommend younger people such as me to become more educated? And how like can we learn more about stories such as Anna's?
Hi, Kathy. Thank you for that question. It's a great one. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we don't teach a lot of this history in schools. I mean, I did not learn. I learned all of my Chinese American and Asian American history outside of the classroom. I learned it when I interned at the Chinese American Museum. I learned it later when I've gotten really involved with the Asian Pacific American alumni group from my college. So it is definitely a problem. I think one of the things that was really eye-opening for me is that when I started to research Anna May Wong, I started to learn about all of these other Asian Americans and Asian people who were working in early Hollywood. And I felt like I had been told a false narrative that, oh, the reason that there's not a lot of Asians in TV and media is because we just got here and we're just still breaking into the industry. And that turns out not to be true at all. We were there from the very beginning. And in a sense, we were kind of written out of history because history is written, well, I mean, depends on who history is written by, right? And if you don't have other Asian Americans contributing to the story, then our stories don't get told. So that's something that I learned through the process of research. And I've delved a little bit into other people's stories. For example, like I wrote a piece about the first, so many people don't know this because Charlie Chan, the most famous Charlie Chan films, Charlie Chan is played by white actors. But in fact, the first three Charlie Chan films, the actors were all Asian who played Charlie Chan. Unfortunately, two of those films are lost, but it's a history that people don't realize. So I've written about that. I write a lot about these types of figures and issues in my newsletter, Half Caste Women. So I would recommend it as a good place to start if you're interested in APIs in early Hollywood. But in general, I mean, it's hard to have an answer to like how do we fix this problem. I think one thing that does make it easier is the fact that we have the internet, right? You can look up these people. I think the fact that we have better preservation techniques, right? So many resources have been digitized. Like if you're really interested in learning about someone and you can't find enough information about them on the internet, try using a newspaper database. Like you can learn almost anything by looking at newspapers, and you can usually access them at your local library. So those are some places that I would suggest starting if you're not finding, these types of stories in, your school history book.
Well, thank you, Katie. And I have to say that my knowledge uh, of the Chinese Exclusion Act, of immigration laws from the 1700s to the modern era, is all since I joined the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, and I knew none of it until then. I remember nothing about this from high school, and I was paying pretty much attention then too. I just don't think they taught it. Elizabeth?
We do have another question. I'd like to call on, and pardon me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. It looks like Afina Liang.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for this super informative presentation. And I am also a high schooler like Kathy, and I'm so grateful that, there's younger people and people like you who's doing work like this. So I have a question. I know you mentioned throughout your presentation that there are communities and people who've supported Anna. So I'm just wondering, like, what are these communities or like people that were Anna's biggest allies? During that era when like Hollywood might have turned its back on her. So who were the people that was, supporting this movement and really helping Anna?
Great question. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would say, so Anna May Wong was a very extroverted person, right? She was very friendly, made friends easily, and had a lot of friends. So, I would describe like her social circles as like international, multicultural, a lot of LGBTQ people that supported her and were good friends of hers. So she was really open-minded in that sense and had a very diverse, many different circles. She was friends with a lot of press people in Hollywood. Things were a little bit more difficult for her, I think, in the Chinatown community because in one way she was seen as inaccessible, right? Because she was so famous. And in another way, I think that people might have also passed judgment on her for not being a more traditional Asian woman, right? Like she never got married, she didn't have a family, she didn't do all the things that your parents want you to do, right? And so, at a time when acting was not really seen as that respectable, so there were also a lot of pressures from the Chinese American community. So from one of the people I interviewed, I don't know if you're familiar with Lisa See. She's a well-known novelist, but her father, Richard See, so it was actually Lisa's grandfather, Ray See, was very good friends with Anna May Wong. And so their family, they were mixed race, Chinese American. So I think they grew up together and were close friends. So she hung out with them a lot. I think they were really her link to the Chinese American community. And so that's kind of what Richard Lee had told me when I spoke to him, or sorry, Richard See had said when I spoke to him. The other thing I do want to mention is that she really, also in like her romantic relationships, but also in her friendships, she really respected artists and writers. So a lot of her friends were novelists, were musicians, were artists, and also a lot of the people that she had romantic affairs with. Many of those were artists in their own right. So she was a very creative person, and that is also reflected in the people that she hung out with.
Oh, thank you. It's an excellent answer. I do want to point out to the folks out there that in 2022, she also appears on the back of a quarter. And so if you collect those women, women American, famous women Americans, which is going through 2025, look for the one with Anna May Wong from 2022. Elizabeth, what else do we have?
Okay, so I remember that we have a question from a person named Andrea Sun. I don't know if Andrea or Andrea would like to address our speakers, or if you'd prefer that I read your question. I'm going to give a moment to see if you turn on your mic. Okay, I'm going to read Andrea's question. So hi, Katie. I wanted to ask, has Anna May Wong ever held a U.S. passport? When she traveled to Europe and China, what kind of document did she use to enter the U.S.? Thank you for your presentation. It was both insightful and inspiring. I really appreciated it.
Thank you, Andrea, for that question. So under the Exclusion Act, which was in place from 1882 to 1943, during that time, Anna May Wong did not have a passport. She had an identity card, and she would have had to use Form 430, which is one of the documents I showed in my presentation. So that she would have her identity card and she would have those forms. She had to apply to leave the country, let them know where she was traveling to, when she was going, and then upon return, she would then have to go through an interrogation, and those interrogations are documented. We have the whole transcript of what was said. So all of those documents are in the National Archives, which is how I access them. So anytime she was traveling to Europe and China, those trips were all before 1943, she would have had to go through that process. After 1943, I don't have proof of her passport, but I assume that she did have one, because in 1955, well, she had several other trips. And in 1945 specifically, she traveled back to the UK to kind of go on like a, walk down memory lane. She was thinking of writing her memoirs at the time. So she did fly to England for a few weeks. So I assume that trip she must have used a passport.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I've just kind of like play with my my Zoom here. Okay, so my very last question is actually to you. It took you how long to finish this book?
So I started researching it in 2019, and I think the final draft went to the printers probably at the end of 2023. So about 4 years. Yeah.
So we can purchase this book from Amazon.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon and also available at most bookstores. So wherever you buy your books.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their attention. Muting, upcoming, first of all, people have in the chat box talked about that walking tour that I was talking up because of Michael Yee, who's the expert. It's July 6th, and all you have to do is go on the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum website, and you can sign up right there. Is that correct, Elizabeth? I think that's correct.
That is right. That is right. It's on the front page. We also put a link to the to the event page in the chat box, and I'll put it there again.
Okay, and then we again want to mention our good friend, Dr. Russell Lowe, talking about the life of Hop Lee, A Willow Tree Becomes a Forest. And then in August, My China Roots by Hui Han Lee. And at this point, it is now 11:30 California time. And we want to thank everyone for participating. And we would like the principles of this to stay on for no longer than 5 to 10 minutes, just to have a little debriefing here, and then we'll call it a day. But we want to thank everyone for coming, and this was another wonderful a wonderful day, and it'll make your weekend, right? And so I want everyone to go about and have a wonderful weekend. And bye-bye until next month. And let's have the principals stay on. And that includes you, Carolyn.